Good afternoon, my name is Ola Atamanova, and it's my pleasure to see all of you here in Ukraine Media Center Ukrainian Forum. It's day 471 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and now, just like yesterday, we will be talking about the catastrophe which was provoked by the Russians in the south of our country. After the detonation of Kakhovka HPP, I want to introduce our speaker today is Denis Marchuk, the Deputy Chairman of the Ukrainian Agrarian Council. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So, Mr. Denis, let's talk about the consequences of this terroristic act. What are the consequences for the agricultural sector? Yeah, right. The actions of the aggressor country are evolving. They result in man-made catastrophes. And after ruination of Kakhovka HPP dev, we can state that those are the very serious consequences because they result in death of Ukrainian people. We know the cases when, due to the flooding of the left bank of Kherson region, those cases are numerous, and also the economy of Ukraine is affected. We will have to liberate those areas to get back jobs to the people. Now, the canals that were used for the irrigation of the lands of the Ukrainian agriculturals are exhausted, and it will be very difficult to work for the time being. Before that, about 500,000 hectares of land were irrigated by Kakhovka mainway channel. It's 94% of Kherson region and about 30% of Dnipropetrovsk region. Those were the regions that were using the irrigation. Calculating our losses, we can only state it from the pre-war period of time, because unfortunately we cannot access those areas, but I hope that thanks to the armed forces of Ukraine we will make it shortly. But we may state that the losses are colossal, because as of year 2021 the region was manufacturing more than 4 million tons of grain and oil crops, and it's more than 40% of export potential of Ukraine. It means a lot of jobs, a lot of people who were engaged in this work. So it will amount only in $1.5 billion that Ukraine will not receive as the export proceeds. I'm talking about the grain crops, but we also remember that the south of Ukraine is main supplier of the vegetables. We all love to consume tomatoes, cucumbers, and watermelons that were coming from that region. Unfortunately, we will have problem with these type of products too, because grain crops can be grown using different technologies, but the vegetables, they require sufficient amount of water for proper growth. So since the beginning of occupation, we've lost a lot of offer in the market from Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, and even when we deoccupy the territories, it will be very difficult to get back to this business after the deoccupation, because the agrarians said that we will not be able to grow vegetables if there will be no dam reconstruction. So we cannot take the water for irrigation from the reservoir. It will also result in huge losses for the cattle sector, because the fodder cannot be processed due to the lack of irrigation as well. People who were making their lives there, they ended up in a catastrophic situation, in fact. So talking about the recovery after this catastrophe, what can we do now? What we'll be able to do in that part of Kherson region which is under our control, and what we will have to do after the occupation? Well, talking about the right bank of Kherson region, yes, we may say that those areas were affected, but the financial losses may be calculated after the water subsides. It's about to be happening shortly. Now the relevant agencies report that the level of water is going down. The data which is being submitted by the Ministry of Agrarian Policy, they report about tens of thousands of hectares which are flooded, which will result in loss of more than 100,000 tons of products that we will not be able to add to the aggregate harvest. And on top of that, this territory is densely mined, and it's a huge volume for them because during preparation to the spring sowing campaign, about 300,000 to 400,000 hectares out of 300,000 or 400,000 hectares, only 50,000 were prepared. The rest of them are contaminated very densely with mines and debris. So after the flood subsides, we will need probably some state support for the agrarian manufacturers who operate in the deoccupied territories of Kherson region. But talking about the demining, we will include Mykolaiv and Zaporizhia regions too, because they are the they have the top rating in the density of mining. And talking about the deoccupied territories, let's first liberate them and hope that it will happen shortly. Do you have any reports from the agrarians who were affected by this tragedy, by this catastrophe provoked by the Russians? Well, we are in constant communication, but apart from this communication, from stating their losses, we cannot physically help them, because in that territory they have homes and they have their businesses operating there, and they say they have no place to go back to because everything is flooded. So there should be a state support program to support the agrarian sector somehow, to make sure that it can resume its operation, because during the pre-war times in the Zaporizhia region, agrarian sector was one of the key sectors of economy, which resulted in a collection of taxes and replenishment of this for regional and central budgets. So these are the losses that we may report already. Dear colleagues, let's proceed to the questions from the floor. Good afternoon, Anastasia Kravchenko, Ukrinform. What if the Kakhovka HPP is not being reconstructed? Are there any alternative ways for the development of the agriculture in those southern regions? Maybe some other sectors which are less dependent on irrigation may be resuming in their operations, because we understand that we have to reestablish the economic operations there, and the reconstruction of the dam is quite a lengthy process. Well, if we take the fields in Kherson region, it's about 300,000 hectares of land out of million of hectares land which are processed there. But without water, there will be no added value in this area, no added value generated. So those who come back, who will want to continue that kind of business there, they will just increase their area based on just such reflections as come what may. If it grows, it grows. If it's not, then it's a shape. For example, in Europe, the agrarian business is not a business as such. It's just the maintenance of their rural areas which are being subsidized. In Ukraine, it may be one of such cases too, but in view of the competence, in view of the experience, many would be able to switch to, for example, greenhouse growing of vegetables and crops. Even now we have state support for horticulture and greenhouse economy. It may be one of the ways to support the agricultural manufacturers. Also, I'm not saying that it will be critical to everybody, because there is also the technology of drilled wells which will allow for irrigation of the large number of fields, but they will have sporadic nature, because even if you use the drilled well, the water is saline there. Not much waters from the wells are fresh, and also not a lot of companies will be able to install the in view of their financial capabilities, not many will be able to install the pumps to pump the water for such wells. Mr. Denis, what do you forecast? Will we change? Will this result in a change of the structure of agriculture? Yeah, definitely. The South was traditional for growing such cultures as sunflowers, soy, rape. There are perfect conditions compared to other regions of Ukraine. So after the deoccupation, I think that the agriculture manufacturers will look for opportunities to change the structure, and and they will engage all the up-to-date technologies, all the cutting-edge agricultural technologies, like for example the agrarians work in California is the United States, so that they can continue their businesses under the conditions of such drought, so to say. But in this context, what I have to say, now that we've started diversifying from the beginning of the occupation, this diversification will continue. Those regions which have more access to the water, like Odessa region, for example, they started growing more vegetables, or Dnipropetrovsk region or Cherkasy region in the same way. Those regions will be developing in terms of replacement the traditional manufacturers of the vegetables in Ukraine. Thank you very much for this information. I'm reminding you, joining us was Denis Marchuk, the Deputy Chairman of the Ukrainian Agrarian Council. Our next briefing will be at 1400, and joining us will be Grigory Plachkov, Head of the State Inspectorate for Nuclear Regulation in 2017-2021. So stay tuned, work together for our victory, and glory to Ukraine.